You're listening to Local Government Insights, a podcast for state and local governments. If you're looking to optimize operations, improve services for your constituents, and maximize revenue without raising taxes, this podcast is for you. Let's get into the show.
Right. Welcome to another episode of Local Government Insights podcast, Modernizing Government Leadership, your source and insights for local government technology. My name is Allie Maynard, and I'll be your host today. I'm thrilled to be joined by three incredible guests who are leading voices in the integration of AI in public administration. We have with us today Micah Gaudet, Dylan Hayden, and Robert Hiett. Each of them have authored a book that provides unique insights and practical strategies for leveraging AI in government. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Allie.
Thank you.
To kick things off, could each of you briefly introduce yourself and share a little bit about your background and how you became involved in AI for public administration?
Yes, Alex, happy to thank you so much for having us on here and for Avenue, all the important work they do in this space and driving the insights we need in local government. Super, super important, and glad to be back with Avenue once again. I got started within the ChatGPT AI space I first heard about it in kind of the end of December of 2022 and used it just to kind of write really, really bad dad jokes for my 10-year-old boy. And quickly, just by doing that, I realized, okay, there's some kind of potential here, right? Part of that was the jokes just weren't landing for my son. Other part of that was just seeing how cool of a tool this was. And so quickly started doing it for just general content creation, summarizing emails, rewording something. And the more I dove into it, the more I learned more about it, and really to this day, the second application that I open up when I get to work beyond Outlook, which is what our email system is ChatGPT, right? Because it's such an integral tool of things that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, whether it be creating ideas, whether it be analyzing some content or summarizing something just on a day-to-day basis. It's something I'm using all the time. So excited to share some of the ways that I've learned how to prompt and how to get a lot of use out of these different generative AI platforms through the book I wrote, 1001 Prompts for Unlocking Generative AI in Local Government.
Awesome. Thank you, Micah. And Dylan?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having us on, as Micah said. So I've been in government for pretty much since I was 16 years old. And in that time, I've also been involved in emerging technology and dealing with things like data analytics. And so I had a slight background working in, with machine learning. And so when I first heard about the same time, December 2022, I heard about ChatGPT and I was visiting the in-laws on Christmas break and I just sat on the couch and I checked this thing out and I'm like, wow, this thing's just blowing my mind. And I started thinking about, how could this actually be used for, within the public sector? And it got me thinking about like, what are the ways it could be used for good? And that's what led me to write the book.
Awesome. Thank you for introducing yourself, Dylan. And next we have Robert Hiett.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, so I've been in government, working in councils of governments for about 25 years now. And I've always been a technology enthusiast. A long time ago, I got a systems administrator certification. And, again, I've always liked computer hardware, software, so on and so forth. So, over the years, as things have evolved, look for opportunities to utilize it in the public sector. And when AI came along, like Micah said, a little bit less than 2 years ago, I realized that, look, this is going to be a tool that can potentially take off here. And you need to spend some time to learn how to use it and see how this is going to apply to the workplace. So it has taken off. I mean, it has really taken off quicker than a lot of people think. And as I was watching the news and reading the articles and just looking at the information that was out there, I felt that, I work a lot with small to medium-sized local governments. And so they don't have a lot of staff, they don't have a lot of resources, they don't have departments in a lot of cases. And so what I realized with a lot of the information that was coming out about ChatGPT or other things was that it was very high level. And so what I felt like was that there needed to be a good, easy on ramp so that local government officials or staff could quickly understand, what is ChatGPT? How does it work? What's a prompt? How do I talk to this thing? And what are the different types of things that I can do with it in my normal day-to-day job? And so that led me to write the Public Sector Survival Guide for ChatGPT. And it also, following all that, I met Micah and I've met Dylan and some other interesting people. And again, thanks for having me this morning.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining us. Really excited to hear about your expertise and your unique approaches to AI with a shared common goal for improving public administration. So thanks again for being here today. And as we all know, AI is making waves across many sectors, and public administration is no exception. And before we dive into each one of your books, Dylan, could you share your thoughts on AI and how it's particularly valuable in the public sector? And what unique challenges and opportunities do you see for AI in government?
Thanks. So the way I see AI really playing out in the public sector is it's a force multiplier. When you're talking about public sector agencies, it doesn't really matter whether it's local, state, federal. As Robert said, particularly at the local level, you're talking about resource constrained organizations where budgets always seem to get a little tighter every time. They don't really expand too much. So trying to get that technical expertise, traditionally the only thing that government can really do is contract out for certain services. And that brings its own host of challenges in terms of oversight and making sure that you're actually getting the bang for your buck. But now the advantages with AI, and particularly with generative AI tools like ChatGPT, is that you can now, it's really democratizing the technological capabilities for your frontline staff to be able to really level up their performance in their job and provide better services. And also, there's one of the key things about government in general is, in order to provide services, government has a lot of data, right? We have a lot of information on people and participants in programs, whether it's, income data or demographic data, and being able to sift through that and make certain connections so that, you may have somebody who applies for this service over here and then applies for this service over here with a different agency, and those two data sets aren't talking to each other. And now, there's much more potential to make those sort of connections and make various public services much more streamlined and integrated for people, and really just improve the user experience overall.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that, Dylan. And your book, Public Administrator's Guide to ChatGPT, really is a strategic playbook for integrating AI in public sector operations. Can you tell us more about what inspired you to write the book and what makes it stand out from other AI resources?
Sure. So, as I said, when ChatGPT came out, I started looking into how to use it initially to do research. My main background, I'm a doctorate in public administration, and my research has focused on housing, and I've worked in public housing and performance management. So that was an area where I was interested in doing some research, and I was also learning. Prior to ChatGPT coming out, I was learning how to code as well. So I had been working on Python, and then I heard this thing can write Python code for you. So then I started dabbling with that, and I'm like, man, this thing could probably do data analysis better than I was using with Excel and SPSS. Let me check it out. So Python programs to do correlation analysis of various data sets. And I wrote an article in Cityscape about that, mining housing data using a higher powered shovel or something like that. And when I introduced that to some of my colleagues, I work at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and I introduced it to them. There were a lot of people who were like, yeah, just starting to hear rumblings about this ChatGPT thing, and they're like running away from it scared. And I'm like, no, we can't do that. This is going to be a technological revolution that we cannot hide in the sand. So, but people, they hear AI and they got freaked out. So I was like, okay, we need to take away some of the aura of what this is and really just kind of make it digestible and explainable to people in the public sector. So that's what really got me into this. And when I first started learning about how to use ChatGPT, like I looked on everywhere somebody goes is the University YouTube, right? And you start watching all these videos, and everything was all about how can you use ChatGPT to make, hundreds of thousands of dollars, make $14,000 a week using ChatGPT. And I was like, there has to be some use for good. There has to be some sort of public use case that like benefits everybody, and it's not just some profit-making venture. And so that's really what inspired me to write the book. And the way I wrote the book was that based on my personal experience working in local, state, and federal government for most of my career, I did not have a tool like ChatGPT. I didn't have generative AI, but I could easily think of a whole bunch of situations where if I did have it, here's how I would use it. And I thought that that was the best way to kind of convey how this tool can work. So that's the way I wrote it. I looked back at various situations, and then I wrote the prompts for ChatGPT saying, pretend you are this person and this is your task. And that's how I got into prompting. And I wrote the book in that way.
That's awesome. I can definitely tell that your book, it really is a much needed roadmap for those public administrators who are unfamiliar with AI, but are starting to recognize its potential. So I find that your book is definitely a great resource for those types of people. And I noticed also you emphasize the importance of ethical considerations and transparency in AI adoption. Can you share some of your practical strategies for ensuring AI is implemented responsibly in government?
Well, one of the things that I touch on, particularly when you're using any type of proprietary thing like ChatGPT or any of these generative AI tools, again, when we're dealing with public data, I wanted to remind my readers that you're often dealing with, in the public sector, you're often dealing with vulnerable populations. You have, lots of data, personal demographic data. You have a lot of type of, personally identifiable information. That's the type of stuff that you don't want to just put into a commercial tool. So just getting people wrapping their minds around, like, it's a useful tool, but there has to be some sort of safeguards or guardrails, and that starts with the individual user. And from there, I mean, I in the book, I didn't get into developing, more robust data governance strategies. This was really focused more on the individual, like starting to experiment with ChatGPT in the public sector. But yeah, I touch on that, and I introduce readers to the concept of hallucinations and knowing that what the outputs when you're dealing with generative AI with these particular tools, they're probabilistic. It's an algorithm that's creating the next most probable output, and it's not deterministic. It's not finding information. And at the time that I wrote this, you didn't have the multimodal capabilities with the search and all those other things. So it wasn't like Google, where the information was out there and existed and was vetted on some website and curated. Like, this is making something up that's completely new, and it could be entirely false, and that you have to take that into account.
Absolutely. It's really important to note that. So I'm happy that you at least discuss that a little bit in your book. And I know, you've been using AI now since 2022, I think you said, and with your background, I know you look back and think about many opportunities where we could have used AI and how it would enhance your operations and your efficiency. Are there any examples that you can share from your experience of how you used AI to enhance public administration processes?
Well, I could give you one of the examples from the book that I talk about, which was looking at an experience that I had when I was with the New York State Department of Labor. Only about 6 weeks after coming on board, Hurricane Sandy hit New York and the East Coast, and a lot of our offices downstate in New York City and Long Island got wiped out, and they had no power, they had no electricity, and we had to provide disaster unemployment to tens of thousands of New Yorkers in this very short amount of time, because a lot of them were out of work for the same reasons. And we had this situation where we had to rapidly get volunteer employees out to these disaster assistance centers and provide them with the resources and manage all the logistics involved of getting them laptops and forms and data cards and pens and pencils and all that, so that they could provide this level of service to people who needed it. And when I came into that position, there was no playbook. The person who had the playbook from the tropical storm that happened the year before had retired. And I found some pieces of paper in a desk somewhere and cobbled it together. And it took me a few days to kind of get this up and running. And I thought about that when I was with ChatGPT, and I was like, well, hey, just imagine you are one of these field workers. What are the things that you're going to need? Give me a list. And like, it just spit it right out. And I was like, based on my experience, I'm like, that's a pretty good start. As far as a rough draft, it was about 80% there for the things that we needed. And then I realized, oh, well, if you kind of continue with that chain of thought prompting, you can just have this conversation with this tool and it will build you your go kit, essentially, like at least the instruction manual that you would need in this type of situation, and the checklists and all the other things that would go along with it. If I had a tool like that back then, that would have been amazing.
That's a great example. I can't imagine how much time you would have saved if you had a tool like ChatGPT during that time. Well, thank you, Dylan. Thank you for sharing that experience. And Robert, now I kind of want to shift the focus over to you and your book, The Public Sector Survival Guide for ChatGPT. And this is also really a comprehensive guide for government professionals looking to leverage AI. What was your motivation for writing your book, and how do you think it is specifically catered to the needs of public sector workers?
Well, kind of like Dylan said, when this stuff first started rolling out, obviously I realized it was a good tool, but there wasn't a lot of information out there. I mean, I can't tell you how much time I spent with fruitless Google searches, taking a deep dive on Reddit forums and other places. And you just had information all over the place. And then when you would go to YouTube, it's like Dylan said, how to make $1 billion in 60 seconds with ChatGPT. I mean, none of us here are billionaires, so we hadn't figured that out yet. But you get tired of seeing that, because it doesn't lead anywhere, at least not for what we're trying to accomplish. And then the few YouTube influencers that you would run across, you'd be watching this video and they give you 2/3 of the puzzle, and then the other third is hidden behind my paywall over here, or they just don't tell you, period, because they might want you to tune in to another video later. Okay, but so again, and then on LinkedIn you have another set of influencers and people that like to put up fancy glowing infographics that they get your attention, or they make posts that are too detailed. So, you kind of get the not enough info or too much info, and while you're trying to self-learn. And so, I spent months just trying to learn it myself and go through things. And As I mentioned earlier, I mean, I'm the executive director for the Upper Coastal Plain Council of Governments over in North Carolina. And I work with a lot of rural local governments. I've got some small metros. And again, they don't have a lot of people or deep IT resources or stuff on the cloud. And so we kind of have to figure things out ourselves. And as Dylan mentioned, ChatGPT has the ability to really be that force multiplier. And in small local government in rural areas, we're dealing with retirement crisis going on. You've got a lot of loss of institutional knowledge. You've got people coming in who are trying to fill the boots of somebody who was in that job 30 years. And the one thing that we do have in abundance is we have information. But you need to take that information and you need to digitize it. And then how can you use stuff like ChatGPT to create a knowledge base, which you can do. I cover that in my book as well, creating custom GPTs. But the person has to know how to use ChatGPT to get anything out of that. It's just like if you pair up a really knowledgeable, experienced employee with a brand new person, they've got to be able to communicate to one another, or there's not going to be a knowledge transfer. And so here with ChatGPT, it was really the same thing. How can I put together a manual that can walk people through the early steps and get them to kind of see how this works without giving up and just saying, hey, this isn't for me. So that's really the initial approach of my book. It was to try to slowly introduce them to the stages of what you need to know about how to use ChatGPT, give them some real world examples, and then move forward with working in the kinds of things that you would do on a day-to-day basis with the different ways that you can use ChatGPT. So, if I'm developing a press release, then it might be good for them to know how to use the persona feature, act as a public communications director. And I need you to help me to create a public press release about a new park event that's going to happen on an upcoming weekend or something. And if they know that, then they can work with ChatGPT and maybe create a good framework for a press release and do it 80% quicker. I think that one of the things that I try to stress is that using ChatGPT or AI, it's not going to do your job for you. You still have to keep a human in the loop. It's going to get you a good portion of the way, but there kind of is a misconception out there right now that if somebody uses AI, that it's just going to do the job for them, and no human has to even look at it, which we all know here that that's not the case. I try to teach people how to use it, some different ways to use it, wrap in the ethical use, the trustworthy use, make sure we're keeping the knowledgeable humans in the loop, and give people a good feel for how this tool can be used on a daily basis without being overwhelmed by the technical jargon.
That's great. It really sounds like you're providing people with the tools they need to integrate AI in their daily operations. And just like you explained, creating press releases, I know that I've done that before. And you really have to know how to use the system to get the outputs that you really want. And I know in your book, you also cover advanced prompt engineering techniques and even step-by-step guides for using tools like DALL-E 3. How can these tools transform the way public administrators approach problem solving and decision making?
Well, again, it's good to get a basic knowledge and a basic familiarity with how to use these tools, because I can't tell you how many things I've sat in where people will put up a survey and the number one answer will be, I don't really think AI is useful because I don't get anything useful out of it. It just gives you generic replies. And so when I see that, what that says is that audience is untrained. So if you know how to use it at a basic level, you're going to be productive really from the get-go. The more proficient you become with it, I mean, proficiency will come with practice and experimentation. So you have to have an environment where people are not afraid to experiment and try things. But advanced prompt engineering really boils down to, how do I talk to ChatGPT or any other like ChatGPT? How do I talk to it? How do I structure that conversation? How do I make sure it understands what the tasks are and what the outcome needs to be? And then do I expect ChatGPT to just know it, or do I need to give it some contextual background information? There's a lot of people who don't understand that you need to feed ChatGPT what I would think of as local information that may help boost the outcome there. So, again, it's just asking those right questions to get the right output. It speeds up time. It speeds up the time that it takes to develop a document. So like Mike and I were on something the other day. We took 2 voluminous federal documents. We used a few prompts, and we came up with an 80-page compliance checklist in no time flat, compared to how long that would take to sit there and just do it by hand and go through that. For me, I live in a world where I have to navigate federal regulations all the time. So when I get a new set of federal regulations that are thousands of pages long, I mean, it takes time to read through that. But you can use advanced prompt engineering. You can use ChatGPT. You can take the old rule set and the new rule set and set up an instructional framework, and you can have it go through, do the reviews, give you the highlights, and you can also make it focus on the things that are relevant to you, as opposed to trying to give you an answer that's too generic. And then you have to sit there and mine through that even further. So what I would say is that advanced prompt engineering really is practice. And it's practice asking ChatGPT questions, getting answers, and then continuing to refine to get the good output. So hopefully I answered that question for you. Now, DALL-E 3, that's one of the functions that is built into the ChatGPT. And everybody's not a fine art creator, naturally. So, my background here is DALL-E 3 created. I knew how to prompt that, right? So if I had to paint that by hand, it'd probably look like a stick figure back there, and real, it looked completely different than it does now. But one thing that something like DALL-E 3 can do is it can help create promotional. So when you think of promotional materials, outreach stuff, training props, or training backgrounds or scenarios, DALL-E 3 can help create those kinds of things. And then you can take that, work with ChatGPT, and create you a quick PowerPoint, and you had everything right there at your fingertips to do it all at the same time.
Thank you, Robert. That was a really great explanation, and I think that'll be really beneficial to our listeners, who are just some of them that are just getting started out, but also some of them that are more avid users too. So thank you for that thorough explanation. And in your book, you also touch on AI governance and ethical considerations. How do you see those elements playing a role in the future of AI in the public sector?
Ethical and trustworthy AI, again, some of it goes back to what I said a minute ago, where there's this, depending on who you're talking to, some people expect you just type something into the AI, it gives you an answer, that's the end of the road, and then people run with it. Obviously, that's not what should happen. Anything that is produced by AI should be reviewed by a human, and also a human who is knowledgeable in that subject area. You know, if Dylan is a rocket scientist and I'm not, and I'm going in trying to create a rocket scientist manual with ChatGPT, then I'm not the right person to be reviewing ChatGPT's output, because I wouldn't know if it's wrong. I need to hand that to Dylan and say, hey, is this right? And so when we think about ethics and governance, every organization
Telescope, isn't it?
yes, the telescope. You know, and so when we think about governance, one of the best practices that they're talking about right now is that organizations should have a governance policy to provide an outline for how employees should be using AI within the organization, and how the organization itself is going to use AI, you know, and for what purposes. How transparent that is really going to be up to the particular entity. But you have, right now we're in a situation where a lot of employees across the nation in organizations, they're using AI at home, and then they're coming and they're using AI at work. The workplace may or may not have a policy, and the workplace may or may not even be providing the ChatGPT or AI platform. You know, just about everybody gets internet access. So I had seen a study not too long ago where, yeah, about half of people are using ChatGPT or Copilot because they're accessible and they're free. And so the reality is that people are using it, and you do need to have some governance. You do need to have some controls, but at the same time, you need to provide employee training. You need to have some kind of internal AI team that you know you're working together to help chart the organizational goal, and what AI tools do you need and how are you going to use them, so on and so forth. And so we're it's a best practice, but the reality is there's a lot of organizations that don't even have a governance policy at this. There's some examples out there that people can adopt. I've got a model in my book. I've got a whole section about ethical and a potential governance model people could take and modify. It's something that definitely needs to happen. And then the last thing I really want to say there is understand that for the average small to medium-sized local government, if you're not using an enterprise scale platform solution, then you can pass a policy all day long. But if you're not standing over your employees watching what they're putting in the system, off the shelf ChatGPT or some other similar product, it doesn't have a lot of internal controls that come with it. And so, you know, you have to put a policy in place, and then you have to train your employee. And hopefully, as we move forward in the future, more of these tools will have a better administrative set of controls that will make things safer for AI to become more commonplace, because rules, regulations, safety and oversight and so on and so forth are real things that local governments have to deal with, and there's real consequences if they're too lax with that. So my advice is put in the governance, but make sure you're doing the training and as much oversight as you can behind that.
That's a great point. You know, as AI becomes more integrated in all of our lives, I think that's really important to stress. There needs to be some way to monitor in the workplace, and clearly governance and ethics will continue to be a defining role as AI and new technology emerges. So thank you for sharing that, Robert. And now, Micah, moving over to you, your book, 1001 Prompts for Unlocking Generative AI in Local Government, is a collection of actual AI prompts. What led you to create this extensive guide of prompts, and how do you think local governments can benefit from using them?
So one of the things I've learned, I've had the privilege of talking to thousands of local government professionals across the U.S. over the last year and a half, is one of the barriers that I constantly see. And in fact, I just had this question. I was over at the Arizona chapter for the American Public Works Association this past week. And one of the first questions I normally get after talking with people is, well, how do I prompt? How do I prompt, right? And I don't want prompting to be a barrier to using these generative AI tools, right? So what I did was I took the prompts that I already created, right? Prompts already used, or the kind of the basic structured prompts I use and modified in different ways, and put that together. So that gives you also an idea of how much time I spent using these different generative AI models by running through multiple different prompts and seeing that kind of how that system works and learning that way. And so it's really just a tool to say, okay, the way I think of it is you've read Dylan's book, you've read Robert's book, and so you're not afraid anymore. You have your understanding of how these systems work or what to do with them, what they can be used for, and now you're going into it thinking, okay, now what do I do? And so it's kind of that last mile solution we talk about in the tech industry for laying down fiber or phone communication, that last mile solution to say, okay, how do I get now into actually using this platform or these different generative AI platforms? And it's by prompting. And so that's what the book is designed to do. For anyone who is like myself, I'm not a techie guy. And so for those of myself who might be kind of overwhelmed and taken aback by such a huge model, all right, I can put these different prompts in and start to learn how to use these things.
That's great. And, I love that you mentioned Dylan and Robert's book, because each of you have unique perspectives and approaches to the way you guys are using AI and how you got involved with AI. And your book is really a practical resource for many public administrators and even our listeners today that will find very valuable. And I know in your book, your prompts cover a wide range of functional areas. Can you share an example from either your book or your experience that you use in your daily operations that have been effective in driving innovation or improving operations in local government?
Yeah, I think one of the best prompts, it's in the book as well, but one of the best prompts is you have some content you created, right? Maybe you wrote something out, you're uploading something you have there, and you put underneath that, after you upload or copy and paste your content into the ChatGPT window, and then you hit Shift, Enter to create a new line and put in there, revise for clarity and conciseness. I know it's really simple, but one of the things that we do is we often, what the fire service calls chasing zebras, right? We chase innovation and improving operations, these big, huge things. And obviously there's some really cool things we can do in terms of some really great features we can do. The example Dylan mentioned, as he was talking, I was thinking through the different, I used to work in public housing, so we kind of that similarity what Dylan and I do, but thinking through the 52-580 forms you have to do for the housing inspections. And I know I'm triggering all of my PHA guys out there and gals out there once I say housing inspections, but the ability to say, okay, let me go through this unit, this residence, and using some of the AI capabilities of taking images and say, okay, is this within the HQS standard? Or, being able to translate that into different languages as well too is extremely important. But while those are all fine and wonderful examples, sometimes just the ability to communicate effectively is one of the most important things we can do to improve operations and drive innovation, is through effective communication. And so by having that prompt of revise for clarity and conciseness, it makes sure that what I'm trying to communicate is really hitting the mark, and I'm not losing people, or I'm not losing the information that I'm trying to gather or the direction I'm trying to give through a bunch of extra words, which is extremely valuable. And with that, I'll stop talking because I just talked about using less words. So.
Well, that's a really great point, Mike. And it really shows that, making small tweaks in how we ask AI can lead to more meaningful improvements. So thanks for that tip. I'm sure our listeners will take that one home. It's always nice to have a tangible takeaway to start utilizing AI more often. And I know you also focus on enhancing citizen participation and transparency. And how can AI-powered prompts contribute to a more inclusive and transparent government, in your opinion?
Yeah, I want to clarify too, when I talk about especially citizen participation, What I'm not referring, oftentimes in local government and the public sector in general, we measure participation by the number of likes we get on Facebook, the number of comments we get on our social medias, or the number of people that show up in a room, right? And that is, that's just a really low level bar for citizen participation. And in fact, if you look at the social media algorithms, it's specifically designed to enhance negative type of interaction, right? And so when I talk about citizen participation, I'm actually talking more about interacting with city staff, right? It's the person coming to the public works counter for a permit. And because the public works admin staff or the person with the permit review staff has used these AI prompts to make themselves more efficient, they're able to take that extra 5 minutes with them, right? It's the police officer who's using generative AI to speed up the report writing. So that means when instead of having to sit in a car and write a report for a couple hours, they're able to take the 10 minutes to go outside and play soccer with a group of neighborhood kids, right? That's the type of citizen participation I think can be gained by using generative AI prompts and using these different tools that we have available to us. That's such a higher quality of citizen participation engagement.
That's a great point, Micah. Thank you for clarifying that. I know we see that in local government a lot in reallocating resources and time management. So that's a great point, and AI can definitely improve that. So thank you for sharing that. And, I love the way each of your books offer unique insights and practical solutions to AI and public administration. And I know each of you guys have been working together, whether it's just sharing your knowledge. And I know that you all have read each other's books, and I'm sure using each other's techniques in your daily lives. Micah, how do you see these resources complementing each other?
I mean, I have all three books of Dylan and Robert's and mine on my bookshelf, and something I frequently reference and go back to as we learn these different strategies. And one of the things I want to say too is that, it's extremely hard to write books like Dylan and Robert have written because of how fast the landscape is changing. It's hard to have an evergreen book. And I really think that they really nailed it, right? In terms of having a really evergreen book. That's one of the struggles that I'm seeing with cities with developing AI policies is the models are changing so fast, the policies aren't often keeping up with it. But what you have in these two guides with Dylan and Robert is really the foundation for, okay, how do I think about massive technological change, right? From taking it with a broad picture, right? How should I think about generative AI? How should I approach it? Knowing that the generative AI models that we have today might look vastly different than what we might see in 2 years or even a year from now, right? As the things grow and change. But Dylan and Hayden and Robert Hiett have done a wonderful job of articulating, okay, as a public sector employee, right, our goal is not to make $1 billion. Our goal is not to have a massive YouTube channel. Our goal is not to be a LinkedIn influencer, right? Our goal is to deliver exceptional public services to our residents and guests. And for Dylan to, hundreds of thousands of residents across public housing across the US here, right? That's what we exist for. We are truly public servants. And so they provide us a wonderful structure of how to think about that without getting trapped into this idea of, it's going to make us a bunch of money or things like that. Truly looking at it from the perspective of how can we use these tools to serve the people that we're entrusted with. And then, the final piece is, okay, you can think about this now. Now we know the right way to think about it. Okay, now let's go do that, right? Which is what the 1001 prompts are for, is now that you know how the system works, now that you know how to frame this within the public sector landscape, here's how to go and apply this.
That's a great point. It's great to see how your three books can work together to provide this comprehensive overview of AI, but also while at the same time serving as standalone resources on their own. So thank you for sharing that. And what advice do you have, Micah, what would you give public administrators who are just starting their AI journey? Where should they begin, and what can they avoid? How can they avoid some common pitfalls?
Well, I think it's relatively simple. I think step one is go to Amazon and buy Dylan's book, read that. Step two would be to go to Amazon and buy Robert's book, read that. And then step three, if you want to, go ahead and go to Amazon and buy my book, right? That's the thing and I say that not just because we're talking about these books, but because I really do believe these are really foundational books to help people think things through. And the one thing I'd say about avoiding common pitfalls and things like that is don't be scared of failing, right? In the public sector, we're very, very risk adverse, and for good reason. I know why we are. It's a good thing to be risk adverse, but we're also very trained and skilled, right? And we know how to manage failure. We know how to fail forward. And so I would say, if you've read Dylan Roberts' book, you're going to be able to avoid the really dangerous and disastrous pitfalls. So just go ahead and experiment. Go ahead and have fun. Use the DALL-E creation tool. Maybe you don't necessarily use those images, but it's going to help you learn how to be a better prompter. It's going to help you with your creative side of things, which is an extremely important skill to have in any type of leadership in the public sector.
You're absolutely right. And really, there isn't any resources like your guys' books that you have for public administrators. It's lacking in the public sector. And I'm really happy to have you guys on to discuss your experience and sharing your knowledge with everyone today, because they're really one-of-a-kind resources. And now I want to transition over to the future of AI. Looking ahead, Robert, what do you predict for the future of AI in public administration? And are there any emerging trends or technologies that local government should keep an eye on?
Yes, as far as the future of AI in the public sector, it's got plenty of room to go up. As of the latest Q3 report, we only have about 30% of public sector organizations in the U.S. that have something in an active production state. And out of those, I would say probably a significant amount of them are your larger populated areas that have bigger budgets and more resources. And so there's a lot left to learn about AI in general. There's a lot of there's a lot of use cases still to be developed. There's a lot of conversation to be had around this as the public sector grows into this role of AI. And like Dylan and Micah have said, business can move at a different pace than the public sector can. We've got to think more about particular agency rules and regulations and laws and other things. And I'm not saying that businesses don't also have that risk, but we're directly responsible for serving the citizens and delivering these governmental resources. And so we have to do that within a certain framework, within a certain rule set. And so we need to work with our AI partners, the contractors, the vendors, the developers, and have a good discussion about how we can help AI in general, work with us in the public sector to deliver these programs and services and operational support. So there's a lot of good things left to happen there. There's Mike is doing good work with his network. There's other public networks that are forming to take a look at best practices and use cases and different solutions. But I think a key thing that public sector leaders can do is you can't treat like an IT project. This is something that the leadership, elected leadership, and the staff leadership, they need to understand at a little bit deeper level than a professional development conference session. Mm-hmm. They've got to take it. They need to understand it, at a fundamental level. Maybe they don't need to get down into the trenches, but they need to have a good understanding. What is it? What does it do? How are we using it in our workplace? How are we overseeing it? And what are we doing to train and develop our workforce to effectively use it? Because there's certainly cases out there where if someone doesn't train and outfit the workforce, you never know what will pop up there. So I think, again, the future has lots of promise, but leadership can't outsource the leader part. Leadership has to be actively engaged. You have to have command and control, a good operating set of knowledge on what this is, how it works, how your organization is using it. And if you do that, the sky's going to be the limit.
That's a great point. And I think that's, where your books can stand in too and prepare public administrators and these leaders. How do you think your books can prepare these leaders that you were just speaking about to prepare for future challenges and opportunities?
Again, if you read Dylan's book, my book, and Micah's book, I think that you're going to have a good set of knowledge on how ChatGPT and how AI works. At that basic level, it'll help you visualize how you can potentially use it at an operational level in your organization, and go out there and talk with different partners and different vendors about how to create effective solutions that are going to work for your citizens.
Thanks, Robert. And thank you guys. Thank you all. Thank you, Micah, Dylan, and Robert, for sharing your extensive knowledge with us today. And for our listeners, I highly recommend checking out their books to dive deeper into the topics we discussed. You can find all of their books on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And be sure to connect with them on LinkedIn to stay updated with their work in AI. Any final last words, guys? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Allie, and to Avenue for hosting us on this time and talking about these important books. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you, guys, and thank you for joining us today. And stay tuned for more government insights. We look forward to having you next time. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Local Government Insights, modernizing government leadership. To ensure you never miss an episode, please subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you use Apple Podcasts, we'd love for you to give us a quick rating for the show. Just tap the number of stars that you think the podcast deserves. Until next time.